Bold reforms or more of the same? Is FIFA able to play by the rules? Also on today's programme, a politically polarised Iran heads to the polls as we ask if the country is changing direction. And in Picture This, tornadoes tear across the United States, leaving a path of destruction. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Matthew Moore. Football's leaders are gathering in Zurich to elect a new president as FIFA tries to haul itself out of a corruption crisis. But will Friday's vote signal a new dawn for football's troubled governing body, or is it just a reshuffling of the old guard? Sepp Blatter, the man who just 9 months ago was re-elected FIFA president as his organisation collapsed around him, has been told to stay away. But while football's former king may be out of the picture, can a new order change the playing field and usher in a new court? Today's newsmaker then is FIFA, as we ask if reform is possible.
The governing body of the world's most popular sport is about to elect a new president, under the shadow of one of sport's biggest corruption scandals. 5 candidates are on the ballot list, but among critics, none of them offer the chance of real reform. They say they won't be able to help FIFA shake off its legacy of fraud and deceit.
The betrayal of trust that is set forth here is truly outrageous, and the scale of corruption alleged herein is unconscionable.
Last year, 14 former and current FIFA executives were arrested for rampant, systematic and deep-rooted corruption. And former President Sepp Blatter has been banned from football for 6 years for a disloyal $2 million payment to UEFA boss Michel Platini. With these allegations in the spotlight, FIFA has promised reform and redemption. One of these 5 men will be the next president of FIFA. Jerome Champagne, former FIFA deputy secretary, a Blatter apologist. He was ousted in 2010 and has been trying to get back into FIFA ever since. Tokyo Sequale from South Africa. He was on the organising committee of the 2010 World Cup and also on the FIFA Anti-Discrimination Task Force. Prince Ali bin Al Hussein of Jordan. He had unsuccessfully run before, and he has called for the vote to be postponed until FIFA considers using transparent voting booths to prevent ballot papers being photographed. Gianni Infantino, the second favourite. As UEFA's Secretary-General, he was Michel Platini's right-hand man. But the favourite to win is Sheikh Salman bin Ibrahim Al Khalifa of Bahrain, the current president of the Asian Football Confederation. But he is a figure shrouded in allegations of corruption and human rights violations. In 2011, Bahrain was swept up in the Arab Spring, with anti-government demonstrations in the capital, Manama. Sheikh Salman is accused of identifying protesting athletes, including footballers. Some said they were imprisoned and tortured. Sheikh Salman denies the allegations, but critics accuse him of lying.
That in itself, on behalf of humanity and the human rights abuses, is awful. Wearing his president of the Bahraini Football Association hat, the fact that he did nothing to protect Bahraini footballers, it takes it to a different level.
Sheikh Salman insists he is clean, untouched by FIFA's decades of corruption. But he has also been accused of misusing FIFA funds. Critics say he and the other hopefuls have come from the same spoiled pool, and the face of the leadership would change, but that would be all.
It is a complete and utter farce, holding some sort of popularity beauty contest whilst the place is burning and collapsing around our ears.
The scars of corruption at FIFA run deep, and some believe it needs a complete overhaul and not just a change of leadership before they can begin to heal. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
To discuss if FIFA can be reformed, I'm joined now by Deborah Wise-Unger, a former journalist and manager at the Corruption in Sport initiative at Transparency International. Andrew Jennings, who for more than a decade has been sounding the alarm on FIFA's corruption, And also with us is Dr. Borja Garcia, Sports Policy Lecturer at the University of Loughborough. Thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Deborah Wise-Unger, if I could start with you. We know that Sepp Blatter is still moving behind the scenes at FIFA, and all indications would suggest that his favourite candidate is the front-runner, Sheikh Salman. What conclusions can you draw from that?
Well, I don't think I can draw any conclusion from that other than to say that it does not seem as if FIFA is moving towards the reform agenda that we at Transparency International believe is the only way to go. If there are only insiders there, then FIFA will have a very hard time reforming because it has to change a whole culture in the organization, and that hasn't happened yet.
If Sheikh Salman does win, what would you make of that scenario?
Well, I think that would be quite unfortunate because he has huge question marks hanging over him, as your introductory package showed. And that does not show that FIFA has the clean broom in which to start the reform. I think that from Transparency International's point of view, we would look very, very hard at FIFA going forward. We've already named it as a symbol of corruption in our Unmask the Corrupt campaign, and I think that we would work very hard to make sure that there was a very bright spotlight on FIFA to ensure that reforms were happening.
OK, let's bring in Andrew Jennings now, the man who's been variously described as the reporter who brought down Sepp Blatter, the only reporter in the world banned by FIFA, and the first reporter to uncover corruption at FIFA. Mr. Jennings, Sheikh Salman has said nothing short of a complete organisational overhaul, and the introduction of stringent control mechanisms will allow us to relaunch FIFA in its entirety. Do you take that statement at face value?
I don't think Sheikh Salman knows the first idea of what root and branch changes at FIFA. I don't think he knows. I don't think any of the candidates know. It's the old guard all joining together to try and preserve what they feel the Americans have taken from them.
So none of the candidates would satisfy people like yourself who wants to see real reform at FIFA?
Well, it's not just me. I noticed earlier on a survey of world football supporters. 7 out of 10 wouldn't vote for it. 6 out of 10 wouldn't vote for any of them. 7 out of 10 were very unhappy. Who are these old men? Why do they have to show up? This fellow you're showing now from Bahrain. There's a little talk about democracy in Bahrain, shall we? Well, that was a quick conversation. He's not fit to stand. None of them are really fit to stand. And the sooner we dismantle FIFA and actually get the fans over a year or two to come to a conference paid for by sponsors to tell us what they think is the right way to do things.
OK, Dr. Garcia, you were writing an article in which you said a lot of the international press have actually overlooked something that's very important, and that is their 209 FAs are going to be looking at a package of very important reforms. Are you hopeful that if they're passed, things will change at FIFA? And what reforms are you referring to?
Well, those reforms have been put forward by the Reform Committee in FIFA. It's true that it's an in-house committee. It's true that perhaps could be more independent. But at the end of the day, I think we should agree that the reforms are welcome, and there is a sensible package of at least meaningful proposals. Moya Dodd, the Australian Executive Committee member of FIFA, has actually said something similar to what I said, which is that we should not overlook that besides the presidential election that we are having in Zurich this Friday, those reforms are also very important, and one without the other cannot really bring change at FIFA. So I think, for example, increasing gender equity is a good, which is included in those reforms, is a good step forward. Also including more stakeholder representations in some of the committees, separating the political powers from the financial powers is also a good idea. So I think that the reforms are positive. Probably
Andrew Jennings, are you convinced by this?
I think there is a need for...
Well, no, I think two things you've left out. Well, not you've left out, but nobody has mentioned. One is the Swiss are pondering when to make their second raid. They made one on May the 27th. They took away 9 terabytes of information, and they're digesting it. and they've said they'll move when they feel like it. The Americans are poised to move again, but will it be this week? Will it be next week? Will it be another 3 months? But they're coming, and we exist in a world that doesn't acknowledge the reality.
So
these
proposed reforms, then, you think, is purely cosmetic and is actually missing the more important further development coming from the various justice departments and investigative units around the world?
Absolutely. We'll have to wait and see if there are anybody left at all whose name we know once they've finished their raids, which could take another 2 years. In a Swiss case, it could take 5 years.
Do you suspect that while they have all the FIFA committee there in Zurich, that something like that could happen again over the next couple of days?
That's too rich to presume, but yeah, well, actually, it'd be great fun if they did, wouldn't it?
OK, let's move on to Deborah Wise-Unger now and return to the reforms question. I know Transparency International has proposed at least 3 key reforms to change FIFA. I understand you don't want to see the organisation scrapped, but to be reformed. Can you just tell us a bit more about those key reforms you'd like to see in place?
Well, I think picking up on what Andrew said, it was actually Transparency International and Force of Football that did that poll that showed how unhappy fans are with FIFA. We don't believe that any of the reforms that are on the table at the moment can actually be carried out without independent oversight, someone to actually see whether they are being implemented properly. And as the statutes are written at the moment, it is really very vague as to what criteria they will use to implement those reforms. And they have, as the professor said, put forward new committees, etc., and called for independent people on those new committees. But we do not know who will do the integrity checks of these people and who will, and what criteria these integrity checks will have. That was a major concern we had when the candidates that were put forward for the presidential election we were told that integrity checks had been done, but we don't know what criteria were used. And unfortunately, as Andrew knows very, very well, FIFA is an opaque organization that will close in on itself. And the only way we think that reform can happen is if there is outside oversight, and that doesn't seem to be on the agenda at the moment.
So you're looking for an independent oversight committee. You also mentioned in your report transparency about where the money goes and to separate the commercial arm of FIFA from the executive committee. Can you just pick up on those 2 points as well?
Yes, I can. That is still on the table, the separation. Following the money, FIFA has said that it will look at where all the money goes to the 209 members. We did a report that showed that 168 of them don't even have financial statements. So there's a lot of work to be done to increase transparency and accountability. We also think it's really important that they have conflict of interest checks, i.e. the people who are working there in senior positions must state their interests. One of the reasons for corruption in the past has been that friends have given friends contracts and have taken bribes to hand on marketing rights and broadcasting rights for much less value than they should have been, and pocketed the difference. Andrew knows well about that.
OK, Andrew Jennings, if those 3 important reforms were brought in, would you be in favour of reforming FIFA or scrapping it and restarting altogether?
With respect to Deborah, seriously, scrap it, close it down, move to another country. The new building, which is, they all do it. Franco did it, didn't he? Did wonderful Valley of the, for those who remember the last 2 presidents of the IOC, who died in the war fascist. You've got to find someone to rent that site, which won't be difficult. It's a good new building. You can carry cables easily.
Wouldn't it cause chaos for the smaller FAs that rely on funding to wait for the whole new establishment of a governing body?
Who cares? When did they ever do anything? When did they raise their hand and say, I don't like the smell of this? Would they be thrown out? What the hell?
OK, Dr. Garcia, what would you think is a sufficient level of reform to keep FIFA?
Well, I could agree with one point that has been made before, which is the need for independent oversight. I think that's certainly the weakest links in the reforms that are being proposed. There are no independent directors to be proposed in the new council, so it is called the new executive board. There is not a lot of outsiders checking on what is happening on FIFA. I also think that probably a change of, as Andrew Jennings has said before, a change of generation, a change of new people coming into FIFA that can bring a new culture in the organization will make a reform possible. So there are some proposals which are good at the moment on the table. More certainly needs to be done. But of course the problem there is how quickly can this be done. Big organizations normally always take a long time to reform, and that's not only in sport, although in sport it's probably even longer than in other sectors. So the efficiency of the whole process is probably one thing that is a little bit difficult to achieve, I would say.
Okay, Dr. Borja Garcia, Andrew Jennings and Deborah Wise-Unger, thank you very much for your analysis. Still to come on the Newsmakers, Iran votes in its first election since the nuclear deal. And in Picture This, severe storms leave a path of destruction in the United States. Iranians are heading to the polls to vote in parliamentary elections. They'll also be deciding who will sit on the Assembly of Experts, the group responsible for choosing Iran's supreme leader. It's the first poll since the landmark deal on Iran's nuclear program and is being seen as a showdown between the country's reformers and conservatives. The Newsmakers' Sally Ihan sent this report from Tehran.
The elections taking place on Friday come at a key moment for Iran. The country is coming in from the cold and reconnecting to the global economy after decades of sanctions. Elections here have always been tightly controlled. All the candidates are vetted by Iran's powerful Guardian Council, but they're not all symbolic. President Hassan Rouhani's government is run by moderates and parliament dominated by conservatives. Iran's parliament is made up of 290 MPs, and there are about 5,000 candidates contesting those seats. Members are divided into blocks. Some support a moderate agenda, others are more hardline. Since the nuclear deal, the struggle between these two camps has intensified. President Hassan Rouhani came to power on the promise of bettering the lives of Iranians, but he needs to work with parliament to push through his policies.
These are the first elections since the landmark deal on Iran's nuclear program. The gradual lifting of sanctions is giving many hope that their lives will get better. But it's going to take time for the positive effects to trickle down here on the shops and markets. But the promise of economic reform is a key platform in these elections.
Political reform, however, is still a contentious issue. Thousands of candidates, widely seen as moderates, have been banned from running. Mohammad Khatami, a leading figure in the reform movement, has called on Iranians to vote for candidates backed by Rouhani. He's been banned from speaking in the Iranian media, so he's taken to YouTube.
Those who are concerned about the country's interests, progress and removal of threats and limitations should vote for all individuals on both lists and take a step to secure the country's dignity, strengthen its security and stability, and improve the reform of its affairs.
But among the conservatives, suspicions remain high. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei accuses the United States of trying to influence voters. He said there was a real plot and that even the infiltrators didn't know they were a part of it. These elections will ultimately be seen as a test of confidence in Rouhani's government. 2 years since he came to power, he's managed to push through some reforms in a country where politics is becoming increasingly polarised. Sally Ihan, Tehran, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss the significance of this vote in Iran, I'm joined now here in the Newsmakers studio by Ali Vaez, Senior Iran Analyst at the International Crisis Group. Ali Vaez, thank you very much for joining us. Let's begin with the old dilemma for Iranians, which is the candidates are so heavily vetted, is it really worth coming out and voting?
Look, these elections are unfree, unfair, but interestingly also unpredictable, because usually in the very limited pool of representatives that the people can choose, there is still diversity, and the choice really at the end of the day matters. If the parliament, for example, has a high number of hardliners, they can hinder President Rouhani's agenda for reintegrating Iran's economy in the global economy. And also in the Assembly of Experts, for example, there is symbolic value in terms of how many votes people would get. Someone like President Rafsanjani, former President Rafsanjani, would he get more votes than a hardliner candidate for the Assembly of Experts? That's why, at the end of the day, despite these elections not being free, they really matter.
And reformers like the previous president, Mohammad Khatami, are encouraging people to come out and vote. The current president is also encouraging people to come out and vote. He's, perhaps you would call him a pragmatist rather than a reformer. So why is it important, if people want to move the country forward, to come out and vote? The latest poll suggests they will come out at around about 75% turnout, which is quite high. But why is it important for them to come out and show Iran's democracy working like this?
Look, there are two different visions for Iran currently that exist. I think the dichotomy between reformists and conservatives is really not working anymore. It's because, as you mentioned in your introduction, the Guardian Council has already disqualified massively most of the reformist candidates. What's really at stake in this elections is a choice between the conservatives and the really conservatives. Right. And people understand that if hardliners are dominating in the parliament, they create a lot of problems for the government and make it dysfunctional. And after years of sanctions and isolation, what the Iranian people at this point need is a degree of normalcy and economic reintegration into the global economy.
So how has the nuclear deal changed the atmosphere around this election?
It hasn't changed the atmosphere much because its economic impact has not been felt by the electorate yet. It's too early for them to feel it in their pocket. You know, it takes time for the economic investments to bear fruit. It takes time for money to start trickling into the economy and trickling down to ordinary Iranians. But the overall mood is quite positive because they feel that after years of crisis, now they're moving towards normalcy.
And has that helped the pragmatists and reformers in Iran? Well, the prospect of coming back to the world market?
The reason that President Rouhani is quite popular is because he has delivered on the promise that he made in the 2013 presidential election that he will resolve the nuclear issue.
So now it's the domestic issues that matter.
Absolutely. The real question is now, in the next year and a half that remains of his first term in office, would he be able to cash in on his investment on nuclear diplomacy and actually improve the economic well-being of the population and also deliver on his other promises, most importantly, his socio-political reform promises?
Now, the West and Iran may be moving slightly closer together, but the West still has to be careful, as ever, in how it approaches this election in Iran. It mustn't be seen to be cheering too loudly for the pragmatist or the reformist, etc. Just tell us a little bit about that balancing act there.
Look, there is an experience here that we've seen in the past. Whenever the West has supported one part of the Iranian polity, usually that part has been then sidelined by the deep state, the conservatives who dominate the unelected institutions of the Islamic Republic. In the past, this has happened to the reformists, and it's a mistake to now, for the West to come out and support the pragmatists, because that would render them vulnerable as agents of the West inside the country.
So it could actually have the opposite effect. OK, Ali Vaez, Senior Iran Analyst at the International Crisis Group. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Now, in today's picture this, at least 7 people have been killed by severe weather conditions sweeping across the southeast coast of the United States. Take a look at the path of destruction the storm has left in its wake. Today's newsmaker has been football's governing body, FIFA. The century-old organisation is in the midst of perhaps its greatest crisis, a crisis that some say could threaten its very existence. On Friday, FIFA's 207 voting countries will cast their ballot and choose a new chief. There are promises of reform of an anti-corruption agency, but is the group serious about cleaning up its act, or will FIFA continue to play by the old rules? You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Matthew Moore. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.